time to go to closing remarks by my colleagues, Professor Naim Kapucu. I would like to thank Professor Nederveen for his wonderful presentation. I am very much grateful to your honor of us. Thank you very much. Professor Naim Kapucu is a Pegasus Professor and at the School of Public Administration and School of Politics, Security and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida. Dear Professor Kapucu, you are a sort of public economist with a global perspective also. So you have participated in almost all presentations. I wonder what you have observed, what kind of common denominators you have catched from those presentations. Shall we get your observations on those presentations? Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Öztürk. You hear me okay, right?
You have a wonderful background effect also. Impressive.
This is real. So I'm actually looking at the pond right behind my office at the university.
Is that your faculty, a university campus?
This is the university campus library.
Okay,
the oldest building at the campus. Our university is young, but it's the oldest building at the campus.
Good.
I'm actually looking at that building from my office window. But again, thank you very much for organizing the second annual International Symposium on Impacts of Global Power Transition and Authoritarian Populism and Multilateralism. It's a long title, a lot of topics covered. And I thank to both the European Center for Populism Studies and Professor Öztürk for organizing this really excellent, diverse topics and the timely discussions on several issues. So what I like to do, I missed some of the presentations. I tried to participate all. It was, excuse me, early in the US sometime, and I had other obligations. Unfortunately, I missed some. But what I like to highlight, some of the perspectives discussed, and it was obvious in the questions, as someone studied public administration and public policy, we always ask this question, so what, right? So what and what is next? And how are we going to address those important questions raised in the presentations? So some of the highlights based on my participation, again, I might be biased because of my own interest, but I think some are really important topics highlighted during the presentations. For example, universal principles of liberal democracies, international institutions, international law, power relations, global power transitions based on the changes and shift in the economic powers around the world, and how is this international trade linkages, free trade linkages with World Trade Organization, for example, impact those power shifts globally? Do we have system in place? That was one of the questions earlier today, actually balance those power shifts through United Nations or other global public institutions. We had questions and concerns around complex global governance, the world system, either as a world multiplexity, or Elena Rossum probably would call this polycentric governance, or Professor Nederveen called this connected global system and multilateralism and interconnected system. So what is the role of global community in addressing some of the concerns and questions around universal principles of liberal democracies? For example, educating citizenry and making them support democratic ideals, investing in sustainable development goals, for example, that was highlighted. But we had 3 teams from Europe as an example, in the Netherlands, in France, and the US, studied SDG implementations from the state, local perspectives. Unfortunately, what we've seen, most of the investments were at the local level, not much guidance from the central government or the federal government in the US case. So several highlighted in the presentation, that was very interesting, that SDGs serve United Nations legitimacy, but unfortunately we have not seen substantial improvement. And of course, COVID was one of the big challenge last couple of years, but we haven't seen substantial improvements in implementing those sustainable development goals, actually catching up with 2030 goals. We heard repeatedly the new technological development, artificial intelligence, and especially the role of social media in this global order, as well as potential impact on election and election security. I think one of the probably the most critical element was the discussion around public good. Several panels and presenters highlighted, and income inequality and how it does impact populist power and how they utilize both internally the income inequality for their advantage and the complexity of the international system to benefit, highlighting some of their priorities and attacking public institutions, for example. We've seen substantial emphasis, especially today, how do populists govern, right? What are the core characteristics of their styles and elements, and how democratic citizenship can respond, as well as other public institutions can address those, the way the challenges brought to every country based on the populist authoritarian leaders. And as highlighted earlier presentation, populism is not unique in one country, and it's not probably universal around the globe, but it is very common in many, many, many countries. We also heard from presentations declining trust in public institutions, and that was intentional from the populist authoritarian regimes. And again, the question, so what and how to respond? What we've seen, substantial emphasis on the health of democracy, decline in health of democracy, and in many instances, actually the collapse of democracy in many places. So for many, democracy is work in progress. It is never perfect, but again, that requires substantial investment by all stakeholders to make sure we do have a strong democracy, and people internally and externally who want to damage this democratic institution will not be able to effectively damage those. I'd like to share two statistics with you as I was listening to the presentation yesterday and today. This is coming from Pew Research Center Global Perspectives on Democratic Ideals. So in 2019 survey results, they highlight clear support, for example, core elements of good governance, democratic governance, globally. This is based on 34 countries participated. For example, when the question asked, what are the most important elements in democratic governance, the highest rank was fair judiciary, 82% by the participants. Second one was gender equity, 74%, free religion, 68%, regular elections, 65%, free speech, 64%, and others around 60%, free press, freedom of internet, for example, human rights groups operate effectively. But the latest one was interesting, political parties, only 54%. So there's an interesting trend among people, the way they see core elements of institutions, for example, the judicial system for just and rule of law ranked the highest, but the core elements of democracy, for example, having free parties to run for elections, only 54% think this is quite important. The other statistics I'd like to share with you before I conclude, the Pew Global Attitude Survey asked participants, again, 34 countries, support for direct democracy or representative democracy. So the people responded 78% supports the democratic ideals, and they think that is good. 17% think that's actually bad. It's not too high, but what we see in the survey result, there's a strong support for democratic ideals globally, but there is also openness to other ideas as well. So the direct democracy receives 66% approval, 30% think that's a bad idea. When they asked the question in terms of professionals and experts, 49% think it's a good idea, and 46% thinks it's a bad idea to have experts run. So again, there needs to be some context to discuss this, but we can easily see how populist leaders can actually benefit from the public opinion when they attack the public institutions and experts in any given country. And when they ask rule by a strong leader, 71% respondents think this is a bad idea. Only 26% think this is a good idea. But again, 26% is strong, and that's a support for authoritarian populist leaders. And rule by military is a good news. 73% think it's a bad idea. 24% thinks that's also a good idea. So what we see in here briefly, there are some still tendencies, strongly support democratic ideals, but people still think there are some other options available compared to democratic ideals. So what I propose briefly to can we think about democratic resilience. And resilience is basically at the community level connectedness, community connectedness that helps high level of volunteerism, for example, high level of social capital, as well as civic participation for democratic process and collective decision-making by citizens and other public institutions. So democratic resilience gains substantial attention, especially after the January 6th attack in the United States and some of the countries' COVID response, such as Hungary, with heavy restrictions on freedom, and what happened in Turkey, for example, in 2016. So there's a substantial discussion, again, on democratic resilience, how the democratic institutions can strengthen their capacity and respond to potential impact coming from either internal and external forces. Again, this doesn't provide us a solution for everything, but I think that gives us an umbrella term to think about how we can increase strength of public institutions, how we can improve strength of citizenship. I highlighted, for example, the SDG goals and investing in public education, citizen education. So there are ways to invest both at the national level in different countries, investing on resilience of democratic systems. And I think, as we highlighted, the interdependence and connectedness of international community, there might be some ways to think about this polycentric network governance perspectives, how we can bring international organizations together in addressing some of those complex challenges. Again, I don't really provide all the answers to all the questions. I think this is a quite healthy discussion, asking more questions than answers. And I hope that in the following years, the participants and others will provide some concrete examples to some of those challenges discussed and mentioned. And again, I thank you for engaging me as part of this panel. I learned a lot from every participant, and I hope what I've contributed you will find useful as well. Thank you and appreciate it.